Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and I've definitely seen the narrative changing around The Last of Us with people in my personal life, people in this sphere of YouTube, and just generally people publicly not loving this show as much as they used to because of the abject wokeness that was in the most recent episode 6 with the commie propaganda, the menstrual care of a 14-year-old girl, which is straight up pedo shit, like incredibly inappropriate shit, as well as the emasculation of Joel and Tommy. A lot of people are turning on this show as a result of that woke propaganda, and I'm loving it because I've been very, very consistent with my thoughts on this show for the entire run of its 6 episodes up to this point, and I knew it was going to turn out like this in the end because the writing wasn't good, and we've got all these interviews from Craig Manson, Neil Druckmann, and the directors showing where their priorities lie. And now we have a little bit more information behind the HBO Max side of things about their prioritization about making this show. Now, this is very much business oriented, so I can't necessarily blame the man himself, the CEO or president of HBO Max, who's making these decisions. I can't really blame him, but his priorities are slightly out of whack, but at least they're not woke oriented. And in addition to that, I just want to call out a mainstream article that is just really laughable. So let's jump into it. So HBO's leading man, Casey Blow, on perfecting The Last of Us HBO Max streaming merger and axing shows. This is a really, really long fluff feast by Variety about this man, and there's a lot in there. It's pretty meaty, so I'm just going to use this other article that has his comments specifically in together and encapsulates it very well from the digital fix. HBO didn't make The Last of Us TV series because of the game, and that is a big problem because, yes, The Last of Us is one of the most beloved games of all time. I put it up there in probably my top 3 favorite video games of all time because of how great the story is, which made it perfect for a TV show or movie adaptation because the story was strong, making an easy blueprint and roadmap for the creators to follow. But the thing is, they're not actually following it. The people who don't know the video game that well is like, ooh, that scene, they use some dialogue. It's a perfect adaptation. No, you can't use one scene in the example of episode 6 and nothing else from the video game and call that a good adaptation. One scene does not make a good adaptation. And he says in here his priorities were Craig Manson. Craig Manson was successful and wanted to do it, so they gave it to him. And that is the thing that we've seen in Hollywood for a long time. This isn't about wokeness. This is just about business stuff, and it's not necessarily a problem. But as soon as someone is successful, you give them whatever they want without really doing any research. And I think it would have been better if the president of HBO had done a little bit more research into what Craig Manson wanted because he didn't want The Last of Us, which means a lot of the diehard fans, at least by the end of the season, and it's starting to change that way right now, aren't getting what they wanted out of this adaptation because Craig Manson and Neil Druckmann have admitted they don't want The Last of Us 1. They want The Last of Us Part 2, and they have some really, really rough priorities. Check out my previous videos on those comments, but it's just kind of sad to see that HBO, even though it owned one of the most premier video game stories of all time, one of the greatest, and had an opportunity to adapt it, they didn't look at the video game and say, hey, this is really successful, people really love it, let's make it based on this game, let's do something great on this game. They just said, oh, Craig Manson, he wants to keep working for us, cool, let's keep getting money from him. And it does kind of suck to a certain extent from a creative perspective. It's understandable from a business perspective, but with priorities like that, they're not going to push back against anything that Craig did because they don't seem to care about the video game at all because they don't own it. It's a Sony production. Sony nearly made a movie back in the day, apparently, and I think that would have been better for a few reasons, mainly because the bloat of the television show, I think, is one of its biggest problems, and that would have been trimmed up quite a bit for a potential movie, but they actually own the rights as Sony made the video game as well, so maybe they would care about it a little bit more. That's not always a guarantee because Neil Druckmann helped make the original game, and he doesn't seem to care. So being involved in its creation isn't necessarily a guarantee of care, but there was a better potential for Sony to care about it than HBO to care about it. And it's clear from these comments that he made that he doesn't care about the video game. He just cares about keeping Craig Manson happy. And that makes him a yes man producer, just wanting Craig Manson to keep doing it. And yes, it seems like a good business decision at front, at least right now, because it is getting insane viewership. As much as I despise the show, I cannot deny how good the word of mouth is, how insane the viewership numbers for it are, and that is really a testament to maybe it was a good business decision. Wasn't a good creative decision, and I will call it out as such, but maybe it was a good business decision for the time being at least, because people are starting to change their mind on it, and by the end of the season, I think a lot more people will change their mind because they are setting up part 2 heavily. This entire episode was part 2 setup. It was not about adapting The Last of Us, the original. It was about getting ready for part 2. And that's only going to get worse and worse as we go on, in my personal opinion. And this is a bit of a, conspiracy theory in me. I believe that they aged up Joel to have his death come at the end of this season rather than at the beginning of the next one. It might be crazy, but I think it's definitely a legitimate thing to take into consideration. And considering how much Pedro Pascal probably cost them, I doubt they want to pay him to come back for just a few minutes at the beginning of the next season. Might as well have him film it all at once. If nothing else, they probably at least filmed it all together so they won't have to pay for him to come back. But that's just kind of what the HBO producer, the head honcho at HBO, said about all the situation. And it's nothing that I didn't expect. I just wish that they had actively sought out The Last of Us because they knew how big the fan base was, and maybe they would have prioritized giving the fan base what they want rather than giving Craig Manson whatever he wants to create his bastardization of The Last of Us in preparation for the abomination that is The Last of Us Part 2. But lastly, I want to call out The Verge for this insane article. And yes, they don't know how to make a home screen, a splash screen, because this is insane. But they said HBO's The Last of Us is skipping the cutscenes, and it's for the best. It's skipping the cutscenes. Isn't that like the whole point of a story in a video game? It's where you get 99% of the story. You get the story from the cutscenes. And if you're skipping it, what are you adapting at this point? And as we've seen, we're about 7 hours into this television show, and we've had a grand total of maybe 5, maybe 10 minutes of action, grand total in those 7 hours. So they're skipping the gameplay in The Last of Us, and now they're saying they're skipping the cutscenes, which they do adapt the occasional cutscene okay, but it's one scene per episode, basically, that's from the video game. The rest is nonsensical, made-up garbage. And so The Verge is like, yeah, they're skipping cutscenes, and that's, like, great, but they're also skipping the gameplay and the action. So how is this The Last of Us? The Verge unintentionally says, yeah, this isn't an adaptation of The Last of Us, which is what I've been saying this whole time. They might have the occasional scene, they might have the occasional production design, which is great. I have nothing against the production design, but this is not The Last of Us. This isn't prioritized as The Last of Us. This last episode proved it because of their prioritization of woke propaganda, and that's abjectly what this last episode was. It was rife with it. About 30 minutes in an hour-long episode were full of nonsensical side plots about wokeness. You could cut those out and lose absolutely nothing because they were not a priority in the actual story-wise. They didn't affect the story, they didn't affect the plot, they didn't develop the characters in a positive way. They were just done to virtue signal. So The Verge unintentionally gets it right. This isn't The Last of Us. They're not adapting cutscenes, really. They're not adapting gameplay. So what about The Last of Us is in this show? I say very, very little indeed. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Anon.
Hey, yo, are you feeling what I'm doing up in here? Oh, I know you are. Do you miss all the good, compelling stories that we used to get back in Hollywood that they ain't putting down no more? I know you missing it. So check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues, baby. Book 1, Down in Flames. Book 2, Apocalypse Then. These are currently on sale. What are you waiting for? Get your hands on them. And we got Book 3, Kill the Dark, is coming down the pipeline. Just wait for all the good stuff that's dropping. You ain't gonna be disappointed, fam.